Okay, I think we'll get started. Um, I would like to welcome and thank everyone for joining us this evening. I see some familiar faces, either from our parent caregiver support group that Rebound offers every Wednesday. Thank you. It's good to see you guys. And it's good to see the ones that were at our session this afternoon. So, yeah, well worth the return, that's for sure. Um, my name's Lori. I am the parent support person at Rebound, and I am happy to introduce Dr. Ungar this evening. First, I would like to acknowledge, though, that this event today would not be possible without the PRO grant, the Parent Reaching Out grant, and so we just want to thank the Ministry of Education for this opportunity. I would also like to thank the community partners that have set up display booths here, and I would certainly encourage you, if you've not done so already, to go and go to their booths, pick up any information that you may find interesting and would pertain to your family. I would also like to thank David Burrows. David, with Dr. Ungar's permission, has agreed to live stream tonight's session, which is just a win-win for us, and it certainly will allow a greater audience to benefit from Dr. Ungar's presentation tonight. So thank you on both levels. I would also like to thank the bookkeeper as well. They're here to sell any books. I think there are 4 of his books that are available for sale, so please don't be shy. They will be made available right till the end of the program. So just a little bit of an intro for Dr. Michael Ungar. He's among the best-known writers and researchers on the topic of resilience in the world. His work has changed the way resilience is understood, shifting the focus from individual traits to the interaction between people and their families, schools, workplaces, and communities. As the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family, and Community Resilience and Professor of Social Work at Dalhousie University, as well as a family therapist, he has helped to identify the most important factors that influence the resilience of children and adults during periods of transition and stress. He is the author of 14 books that have been translated into 5 languages, numerous manuals for parents, educators, and employers, as well as more than 135 scientific papers. Dr. Ungar's immense influence comes from his ability to adapt ideas from his research and clinical practice into his best-selling works like Too Safe for Their Own Good, How Risk and Responsibility Help Teens Thrive, and I Still Love You, 9 Things Troubled Kids Need from Their Parents. His blog, Nurturing Resilience, appears on Psychology Today's website. Tonight is an honor to welcome Dr. Ungar on behalf of Rebound, and his praises have been sung numerous times, particularly in the development and delivery of our very own Thrive program that has utilized Dr. Ungar's research and his child and youth resiliency measure, as it's the foundation and response to a critical and challenging time for our youth since 2012. Please join me at this time in welcoming Dr. Michael Ungar.
Good evening. Absolute pleasure. Lori, thank you very much for this invitation to be here and the work of Rebound to make this happen. Really appreciate it, as well as the other community organizations. And I understand I'm being streamed, so hello, who's ever out there in cyberland, and appreciate this chance to sort of share with you a little bit about resilience and talk a little bit about raising kids and what that whole experience can be like. Um, it's funny when you hear your bio read like that, there's a tendency to think, well, it's a lot of academics. I do a lot of research all over the world. I travel a lot. Actually, it's great to remain here in Canada sometimes with this work as well. But I don't know about you, but I still find it still comes down. I always say that what I learn still is much more from the kids and the families that I actually work with than often, through the research sort of formalizes it. But it still comes down to whether or not it resonates with the people that I'm actually working with. So just before I begin, is this microphone cutting out, or is it just me? It's cutting in and out, eh? Do we want to I'm just going to, I would sing, but that would definitely drive everyone away here. This is, you're good? Okay, it's working. Great, thanks. So I just wanted to start really just by telling you, a little while ago, I was working in, I maintained for many years a clinical practice, even as in my role as a university professor and a researcher. And at one point, these parents brought in their daughter, who was about, Bridget must have been at the time just going on 13 years old, 12 years old. And the issue had been that she was in grade 7. And she had made a lot of changes in her life. When she was in elementary school, she was a great kid. She loved to go to the library on the weekend. She liked to swim recreationally. She was in some little bit of sports activities. I mean, in a way, everything was kind of going really well. Well, long and short of it is, she reaches junior high, and everything changes for this kid. She begins to change her peer group. She hangs around with kind of what her parents see as sort of wannabe bad kids. At one point, there's a bit of a party or something in the basement of their house, and some of these girls that come over, they break a lamp or a couple of lamps or something like that happen. And finally, her parents said to her, "Darn it all, Bridget, we don't like these new kids that you're hanging around with. You can either go back to your old friends or these kids cannot come over." End of story. So Bridget, being Bridget, of course, thought this was absolute, crock. She's not going to take this, right? And she begins to act out a bit more. And then one day, a little while after that, this whole thing cascades, and she doesn't come home after school. She doesn't get off the bus. Now, that's not totally unusual. She could have gone to a friend. She could have gotten off at another bus stop. Well, so the parents wait, expecting a call. No call. About an hour after, they start phoning around. "Where are you, Bridget?" They can't find her. Then they began to kind of call where Bridget might be. None of the kids that she's allowed to hang out with know where she is, and the story keeps going. So eventually, they start calling the kids that she's not allowed to hang out with. And a strange thing begins to happen. There's other children missing in the community. Suddenly, the story is getting a little bit thicker. So it's dark by this point. Dad gets in his truck, and he begins to go around the community trying to find his daughter. He's obviously panicked, no doubt. And eventually, word kind of leaks out that they might be out behind this kind of farmhouse, off a little bit on the side of the town, that type of thing. And sure enough, he pulls up behind this old farmhouse, and there's one of these big, the metal Quonset huts or whatever, and he shines his lights into the darkness, and there is this group of kids. And the moment his headlights hit them, they all just scatter like rats in the dark, right? But there in the middle of his headlights is his daughter Bridget, just standing there like. He gets out of the truck, does if I was a polar bear, I would eat you, the eat your young sort of thing. And just, get in this truck now, drives her home, and they basically sort of show up for counseling within a few days after that. Like, somehow we're sort of going to fix this. Now, when I met Bridget, it starts off as a really bad story. And then I started asking Bridget, well, Bridget, I got her parents out of the session at some point because it was just constant fighting. I said to Bridget, just tell me, look, how do you explain this change? And she said, my parents don't understand me. Okay, I get that. Okay, keep going. She says, well, they want me to hang around with those kids I used to hang around with. But all those kids, they are these, preppy kids. Okay? They're really egotistical, high on themselves. They're really like a bunch of little like they're just always thinking about them, and they're chatty and they're petty and they text each other constantly, little insults. Like they're the worst kind of kids that mom and dad think they're good, but they're actually like just awful people. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. So like who else could you hang around with? Well, my mom and dad said, I could go, then there's another group of kids I could hang around with. Not the preps, but I could hang out with the library kids. The library kids? Oh, yeah, those are the kids that just kind of spend all their lunch hour indoors, hanging out in the library, reading. And they're like all like really, pasty. And they're really, like they don't get any sunlight ever. And she goes on and on and on, like this is like the most boring kids. So I said, well, who do you hang around with? Well, I said, well, I hang around with, like, my parents call them the druggies. I said, well, are they druggies? Not all of them, she says. Well, okay, so who is? Well, like, there's a group of guys in there that, they're older and they're using drugs, but we're not part of that. We're like another group in that, and we don't do that stuff. We just like to hang out because they're fun. Okay, so you're kind of like wannabes, but not really the druggies, right? And she had this kind of very sophisticated map of the world around her. Now, the reason I'm sort of telling you that, because once I understood the world from her point of view, I began to see what I see a lot in my research around resilience. What is a kid looking for that in a sense, we, as their parents, can provide them? And if you think about it, what Bridget was looking for was this powerful group of girls who had something to them that could bring her an identity that she really wanted, as well as experiences of control and belonging and a whole bunch of other things. So what we did was we invited the parents back into the session. We explained all this, the way Bridget sees the world, and they kind of got it. Okay, so you're not really hanging around with the druggies, but you're hanging around with these girls who are a little more exciting and not so egotistical as the preps and not so boring as the library kids. Okay. It was interesting. We did a little test. There was a school dance coming up in this particular junior high. And as a little experiment, the parents agreed to do this. Dad agreed to go around the community and pick up several of the girls that they thought were the bad kids, but now they realize maybe they're not as bad as they thought they were. And they picked up several of these girls and brought them back to Bridget's house. And then this group of, I think she was by that point 13 years old, this group of sort of 12, 13-year-olds went into the basement of the house and got all ready for this dance at the school. Now, I've raised a couple of daughters, and I must say there's this kind of, as a father, there's this kind of magical thing that happens. Like, I really always wondered, they go downstairs as these kind of goofy little kids, and then they come up with clothing that you really, as a parent, just don't want them to wear. Does anybody else suffer this, pains of this? Yeah, okay, so I'm not alone in the universe on this one. And so, they kind of come up and whatever, and they're all sort of proud. And then this dad drove them to the dance. They had a great time. And then he took them and he dropped them all at their individual houses. And the message to Bridget was, I accept you on your terms, in a sense. I'm understanding that you're looking for something here. Now, Dad and Mom were not keen on all parts of this, but there was a negotiation in making this happen. And so what I've begun to understand from these kids is that there are patterns to what our children need, especially when they're going through crisis, when they're growing up, when they're stressing us, when what looks like total all-out warfare in our homes. It can actually be diffused reasonably simply. And I say that because I've learned from some amazing parents along the way. I've also, by the way, if I could, and it's a little difficult to see, but I've also learned from some of my work around the world. What you're looking at is a picture of a couple of kids in Cambodia. And you're looking at an older girl who's also about 11 or 12 years old, looking after a younger child, probably her younger brother. And her parents are probably in the structure behind, which is Angkor Wat, which is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And I took this picture while I was there in northern Cambodia, just kind of as a typical scene that you see all around the world, where you have a child who is actually looking after a younger child. Now, I'm not promoting child labor. Well, I wish my kids did a little more labor now and again. But I'm not actually promoting child labor. But what I am learning from children like that all around the world is that there are indeed patterns to how we can understand what it is that kids need. And what she would tell me about this experience, if she's like the kids I've interviewed like this, that looking after her younger sibling and having genuine responsibilities for that child is actually really good for her sense of self. And yet, too often, we, again, don't necessarily do this with our own kids. We don't give them genuine responsibilities for others. The one I always hear people saying, well, I give my children responsibilities. We tell them, they get to about 12, 13 or whatever, and I tell them, okay, you got to clean your room and look after your room. And the kid goes, actually, that's not responsibility. That's your stealing control from me. My room should be my own territory, short of it getting so dirty that the bugs or it stinks or something like that. You want to give a kid control. I did this once with a family where they had their kid was completely out of control, or so it seemed, a 14-year-old. And what we negotiated was that 14-year-old would cook dinner once a week. You're saying, no way. This kid was almost like one step away from jail. And we actually got her to cook dinner for her parents once a week. Why? Because it was a genuine offer. It had to be done. It was real contribution. And what's more, parents had to eat whatever she cooked. Now, there were some limits on it. It had to be reasonably healthy and everything else. But you can imagine, if you actually start talking to a kid and you start giving them those kinds of responsibilities, suddenly things transform. I've seen us, you have 5-year-olds who are going just ballistic in the house and annoying you and everything else. And then if you turn to them and say, look, I am hard at, Grandpa's has his birthday this weekend, and I'm hard at trying to get things ready for the birthday or whatever. And you turn to your 5-year-old and say, look, smarten up and get in here and help cook Grandpa's cake or something like that. And suddenly it's like, whoa, I've got some responsibility. I'm going to make a real big contribution. Now, if you said to that same kid, hey, Grandpa's coming over, go clean up your room and put your toys back in the box or something like that, then the kid is like endless problems with you, right? Because it's really more for you than for them. But give them something that speaks to them, and suddenly things go well. Now, I know that from having done work all around the world. Whether or not I took you to, and you can't necessarily see these well given the lighting, but if I took you to a place like Tanzania or Jerusalem or southern Florida or Ireland or South Africa or Palestine or China or back to Halifax, what you would see is repeating patterns in how we understand what kids actually need. And this is really what I'd love to sort of give you as the gist of this, which is there are 9 things which seem to repeat in people's lives that actually help them to do well when they're under a lot of stress. So these 9 things it's kind of interesting because what I'm actually suggesting is that we can make children much more resilient if we create environments that allow them to have access to these things. There's a bit of a myth sometimes that resilience is an inner quality. It wells up from us. I mean, Oprah loved that, right? I mean, I like Oprah, by the way. I really do like Oprah. It'd be interesting to see if she runs for president. I don't think so, but anyway. And, it's like I kind of like Oprah. She's kind of an interesting woman, very, very interesting character in our universe. But she made a career out of talking about resilience like as if somehow it's about something special inside of us. And actually, most of what makes us resilient is outside of us. It's actually what we are given by our schools, by our governments, by our friends, by our families. These are things that actually give us the resources we need to get through a tough time. I'll give you a small example, completely tangential to tonight, but maybe of interest. When they had the major floods out west in Alberta, what they did was they had terrible problems with getting people to rebuild their houses, right? Because the floods happened in High River, Alberta. I don't know if anybody has family or friends out there. It was terrible. But people spent like up to years sometimes in motel rooms while they tried to sort out the insurance claims and the banks and everything else, or they get everything back to being how it was supposed to be. Can you imagine having your kids living with you in a motel room for months and months on end while they're not going to school and destabilized? This is really stressful. But what we learned, however, was they learned from that experience. And then when Fort Mac was evacuated, 85,000 people evacuated from Fort McMurray because of the wildfires. I don't know if you heard this, but many of the insurance companies and the banks loaded their staff onto those buses that, the rock and roll bands kind of tour in, and they actually sent the bus loads of insurance adjusters and bankers to the shelters where people had been displaced to, and began to sort of, one, to get them cash. There were cash machines on the buses. And the second thing was to start the insurance claims. Now, it's a very funny thing is we sometimes think if you've had your whole house, your whole world, you're unemployed, everything's going to crap, you think that what you might need is a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a clinical social worker. But actually, I'm going to argue what you need is an insurance adjuster. And that the very first thing we should be sending in after a major disaster, whether it's a tornado or whatever, is the insurance adjusters. Imagine a SWAT team of them with red capes kind of descending on your community after a disaster. But the point is, because they did that in Fort Mac, they were able to reboot and to rebuild very quickly. Within 6 months, people were basically knocking together new houses. Kids were getting back to school in their and rejoined with their same peer groups. Now, we're talking about resilience. We're not talking about an inner quality. We're not talking about grit or mindset. We're talking about bankers, for God's sakes. We're talking about insurance adjusters. And the science on this, I'm not making this up, the science on this is really clear, that most of what actually helps us is people, well, like our parents, changing the environments around us, giving us the opportunities we actually need to do really well. Now, if I could, let me just see if I can sort of walk you through a few of these points. For instance, kids need structure. They actually want structure. I know there's no kids here, so we can tell the secrets, right? Kids actually like structure. They like a predictable environment. They like to know that things are happening. And that goes for your teenagers as much as it goes for your 5-year-olds, right? Kids like that predictability. Now, I know they will rebel against it, but the only reason they can rebel against it is because it is stable. When the world is predictable and safe, we naturally seek out control. But let me get to that in a minute. So I'm going to argue we need structure, and we need consequences that match the structure. We get structure, we're good with structure, we suck at consequences. So our kid, they stay up all night with their cell phone on, they're not ready for school the next morning because they took their cell phone to bed, then they're surly in the morning, they're too tired and everything else. And what do? We still let them go to school. We leave them with their cell phone. What do we do as a consequence, right? And I'm always kind of in that mode. You're probably looking, and when the answer is? Well, the answer is to find a consequence that's actually reasonable for the child, right? So, for instance, I always ask parents who are in that terrible situation, I say, well, who pays for the cell phone? Right? Who pays for the cell phone? If a kid is old enough to make the decision to stay up all night with their phone, then they're probably old enough to pay for the phone and the data package. Oh, and a portion of the internet in the house as well, right? And if they're not old enough to make all those payments, then they're probably not old enough to make the decision of whether or not the phone is in the bedroom with them. Natural consequence, a very simple consequence. The other consequence is that there's a loud alarm clock next to their bed, an obnoxiously loud alarm clock next to their bed, right? 3 naturally large alarm clocks next to their bed, right? And maybe there's a dog in the house that has to be walked at 7:30 in the morning, right? Which you also put into the bedroom, hopefully with some newspaper, and into the bedroom with the child. In other words, we make it a little bit uncomfortable for them to continue to stay in bed, as well as expect them to sort of fulfill their obligations. So a child of mine, if they're not able to go to school, or they're sleepy, or they've stayed up too late, or they have their cell phone, and they're paying for their cell phone themselves, of course, and they're still doing this pattern, then I guess the question is, well, hang on a minute, just a second here. Do I have to drive them to school? Oh my gosh, that's an inconvenience for me. If I'm inconvenienced, then I do not have time in my day to do something nice for them later on, do I? Right? It's a kind of a consequence that they can fix. The nice thing about this is, you want the consequence to be something that the child can fix. Give you an example right from raising my own son, who was about 10. He's now in his early 20s. When he was 10 years old, couldn't get him to come into the kitchen and set the table. I would be making dinner, and he just wouldn't come in. One of those, he was just playing that 10-year-old role, right? He was, always busy, always had something, could never quite get there on time to do this kind of stuff. This had gone on for weeks, and eventually I said to him, Scott, look, I am fed up with this. Come in and set the table. This is your responsibility. You make the contribution. This is your contribution to the family. I'm cooking dinner. I'm earning the money. Come on, get in here now. And he wouldn't. Now, I'm not going to take away his allowance because allowance, no one's paying me for dinner, so I'm not going to pay him to set the table. That's kind of outside of my realm. So I said to him, look, he just wouldn't come in. So after weeks of this, I finally turned to him and I said, look, Scott, if you are old enough to make a decision and not contribute to dinner, then you are darn well old enough to make your own dinner as well. And so I said, basically, I'm not cooking for you tonight. Go and figure out, there's the fridge. You can, as long as it's healthy, which means like a sandwich of pressed meats or something like that, you can cook. You can make your own dinner. He knew how to use a stove, but I said, I'm not supervising you, so you can't use a stove. So the kid, the little 10-year-old, he's all proud of himself, right? Just, no problem. And he kind of walks into the kitchen. I'll make my own dinner. I'm not going to set the table. I'll make my own dinner. Goes in, makes a sandwich, comes back out, sits down at the table, eating a sandwich, proud as he could possibly be. No problem, right? I got out of cooking for my kid. One for me, right? This is great. Next morning we wake up. I said, Scott, are you part of this family? Are you going to contribute to this family? Are you going to, really, tonight, are you going to set the table, make a contribution, help us out? Or are you going to just be an independent little person and do it yourself? And like any good 10-year-old, he says to me, I'll make dinner myself. And I said, no problem. I'm not vindictive or anything. I kind of gave him a nice little hug, kiss, pat, off he goes to school, and away we go. So that evening, my job is pretty flexible, so I knocked off work just a few minutes early, swung by the Sobeys store on the way home, and picked up all the ingredients for my son's favorite meal. So that when he came home from school, the house was wafting of garlic bread and lasagna meat sauce and a big Caesar salad and a wonderful pie for dessert. And I made sure that that was all what we had. And then we all sat down and we had our wonderful meal, and he had a sandwich. Now, I didn't back down. In all seriousness, I did not back down. He had made a commitment to look after himself. So we had dinner. He had his dinner. He's healthy, whatever. Next morning, we all wake up. I said, Scott, are you going to contribute to this family? Are you a part of this family? Which is the structure, which is the expectation, right? Or are you going to be independent and do it yourself tonight? And he looks down at his shoes and shuffles a little bit and goes, I'll set the table. Now, I've done an intervention similar to that that's taken 3 months versus 3 days with some families. It's not always easy. But the point is, the formula is the same. When we provide reasonable expectations on children's behavior and consequences that they can fix, they tend to do much better. If I could switch this up a little bit. Number 3, of course, that we see globally, you count your parents, right? A lot of you are parents, caregivers. You count for your kids, which is really great. But I don't want to oversell it. If you're under stress, why do we expect you to be the perfect solution for your kid? In other words, you are important, but you're not alone, which is why we have number 4 up there, which is about all those other relationships, your aunts, your uncles, the brothers, the sisters, the grandparents, the social workers, the friends, the neighbors, the teachers. These are all parts of your world that can actually act as resources to your kid. I also like strangers. I really think our kids should talk to strangers more often. Don't you agree? You want them talking to lots of strangers. I always say not the really strange strangers, but the mildly strange. Like, for instance, when my daughter was 7 years old, right? She's 7 years old, and I want her to feel comfortable talking to strangers. So when I went up to the Tim Hortons, she'd watch me get the same order every day for years. And so this time, around 7 years old, I started driving up to the Tim Hortons, and rather than using the drive-thru, I'd park in front, and I'd give her a toonie and say, look, go in and get me my cup of tea. And there's this little 7-year-old, and she'd walk into the Tim Hortons and stand in line, right? And there's adult, 7-year-old girl, adult in line. And then she'd go up to the counter, put the toonie, say, I'd like to get a cup of tea with milk for my father or whatever, no problem. And I guess she could have died carrying it because it was hot. I'm sure that, there was life-threatening injury there potentially, though she's not really klutzy, so I'm not sure why. But anyway, and then she came back and she gave me the tea. In the meantime, she talked to strangers, she had to negotiate, she had to be independent, she had to figure out a place, and she was making a genuine contribution to Dad as well. But there was one downside to this, in all seriousness. I never got my change back.
And she was always eating Timbits as she kind of entered the car again. So I think I was being scammed a little bit, but we decided it was a sort of a truce, I guess. So what I'm beginning to understand is that people, we need lots of relationships. We also need a powerful identity, right? We need that opportunity to contribute and to feel powerful, whether we're 5 years old. You might ever have a 5-year-old come into the kitchen and want to bake with you, and all they do is they make the flour goes everywhere. It's a complete disaster. But if they take the chocolate chips and they put it into the dough and do one stir, it is their chocolate chip cookies. You ever notice that? And then when the cookies are being served hours later, it's like, hey, those are mine. I made those. And then suddenly they're the ones dishing them out to the siblings, deciding who gets which cookie. That is amazing. That is also about identity. That's I am powerful. I am someone who's worth noticing. On a slightly more serious way, though, I also was working as consulting on a case in a school recently. And this fellow was about 10 years old, 11, just junior, elementary school. Very awkward child, very anxious child, visibly different than the other children in some respects too. He had a lot of very problematic with his dental work because of neglect in his family, and a lot of hand-me-down clothes and this type of thing. So he stood out a bit in the school environment, and he got jostled, he got picked on, he got bullied a bit. And what this kid had figured out, though, he was a survivor. He wanted to survive. So what he decided to do was he would never go out on the playground. He would hide. He refused to go out, at recess time or lunchtime, and this was his coping mechanism. So that was interesting, but it was where he hid that really caught my attention. He would go and hide in the shadow of the janitor in the building. Now, this janitor, who I met once, is this kind of gruff, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. I'm on the East Coast. Any other East Coasters here? Anybody else from the East Coast? Yeah. We're always sort of maritimers, right? Yeah. And I'm from the, you can imagine this kind of guy. He's just very, very grounded. He would have seen those deer that were roaming by your post office a few hours ago and probably gone hunting for them, solved the whole problem pretty quickly. I mean, he was just that kind of character, right? Very, very solid, grounded kind of guy. So this kid is sidling up under his shadow all the time, and he knows that the other kids won't pick on him as long as he's there, right? And this goes on supposedly for a couple of weeks until this gruff salt guy, turns to this kid supposedly and says to him, well, bloody hell, if you're always going to be underfoot, then pick up a mop and give me a hand. And I'm sure he just broke every occupational health and safety law in our school system or whatever, but it worked. The kid picks up a mop, and he starts mopping the floor in the shadow of his mentor. So suddenly he has this amazing relationship. Now, you and I might not think that mopping a floor is something of great, powerful identity. But for a 10-year-old who's being always jostled in the hallways, it was like he was Batman or something. Because if you think about it, when you're mopping the floor, what happens? People who come in from outside, what do? They don't jostle you. They walk around you, right? And then they apologize for stepping on your wet floor. It was like, whoa, people are apologizing to me. People are noticing me. People are walking around me. All I have to do is pick up a mop. And I've got a great mentor as well. He had struck gold. Now, if you think about it, I'm showing you some patterns here, right? Because not only did he develop a powerful identity out of nothing, but he also found a sense of control, right? He began to make decisions that were important to him about where he was going to be and who he was going to be with. Number 7 is also kind of neat. It's really about this sense of belonging that we can have as well, and whether or not we are given that from the environment. Do people really feel like they belong? Do they make a contribution, right? I learned from that girl in Cambodia that one of the things we really need is a feeling that we are important to others. And why don't we give that to our kids? So often they have no genuine responsibilities anymore in our families, and then we wonder why they're kind of narcissistic little, and we're not necessarily seeing the changes. When I wrote a book called We Generation, I was really about that I was arguing that if we think our kids are me, it's not true. They want to contribute. it's us as adults who are denying them those opportunities to make contributions. We don't let them walk to school anymore. We don't let them take responsibilities for younger siblings. We don't give them real, genuine things to look after for themselves. We're constantly doing for them, which is not helpful. By the way, we also want kids need their rights respected. They want social justice, but they also want to feel responsibilities, right? They want to know that they have responsibilities for other people or for themselves. And finally, they really do want safety and to feel supported and very much like that. Now, I'm going to argue that as parents, we can, in very small ways and in very big ways, provide children with these opportunities to find these things. If you think about it, any of you have kids in activities after school or something like that, right? Do you find yourself constantly running the roads and packing the lunches and dragging the kids into the van, or any of you kind of living that constantly? Yeah, you got that, right? And, sometimes people say, well, are activities good for kids or bad for kids? Like, how many is enough and all that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of the mind of it doesn't really matter the number. What it matters is how you get there. How much responsibility do your kids have for themselves and for others to get to the activity? For instance, if it's like an 8-year-old, do they pack their own gear for their hockey or pack their own gear for the soccer, right? And some parents, seeing head nods, which is really great, because what you want is that, right? And then I know parents will often say, oh, no, I can't have my 8-year-old pack because they'll miss their left shin pad or something. To which I say, that's what you want. You want your kids, I'm going to use the F word, I'm apologizing, I'm going to use the F word, you want your kids to fail. Right? Of course you do. You want your kids to occasionally fail. Or you want your kids to fail in ways that they can manage to fix. So you want them on the bench at the soccer, and they look down, they go, I don't have my left knee thing. Can you go back to the house and get it? To which your response should be, no, actually, I'm spending time with the other dads here. That's cool. Next game, just be more careful when you pack. Or solve your problem another way. Ask to borrow something. I don't know what you're going to do, but it's your problem, not mine. Figure it out, right? Now, yeah, the kid's going to be uncomfortable, but that's good. Because you want them at age 8 to be uncomfortable for something that they have done and that they control. And then the magic is that the next time, if it's important to them, they won't forget their knee pad, right? They will actually remember. They will actually begin to take responsibility. So maybe when they have a Visa card, they'll understand the principle that if you spend, you have to pay it back. I know we adults also struggle with that one, so maybe that's too much to ask. My point is that we want our kids to sort of incrementally learn some of these life lessons, and we provide the opportunities for them to get all of these 9 things. Now, when it doesn't work, I'm not saying it's easy. I was working also just recently with a fellow who's 15 years old, going into grade 11, 15, 16 years old, going into grade 11. Or was in grade 11. He was in grade 11. And that's significant because he was struggling. He was doing drugs. He was not always attending school regularly. And in fact, what the school was saying is if he didn't get enough credits, he was going to actually not be able to advance to grade 12. Right? At that level, it is about number of credits. Now, the only thing that mattered to this kid was his friends. As long as he had his friends, he was fine. So he wasn't putting any effort into school, and he wasn't trying to control his drug use, and he wasn't wanting to do anything around the house. As long as he had his friends, life was good. Now, his parents had basically spoiled him, and they knew it. They were self-made money. They came out of incredible poverty. They had built a beautiful business as landscapers. Dad did a lot of the trucks and the moving and everything else, and Mom did all the books in the business. And they'd made themselves a very lucrative living out of it. And whenever their son said, I want something, like a new snowboard or whatever, or the school trips or whatever, they just gave him the money. And then they said, could you also do, and then when he blew them off and continued to do drugs and stuff, they kind of understood it would probably be a phase and he'd grow out of it. But he wasn't growing out of it. So eventually they realized that he was being threatened with losing his school year. He would not advance to the next grade. And that's when it kind of hit the kid, because what he realized was it wasn't that he wanted to finish grade 12. He didn't want to lose his peer group. And if his whole peer group went on, he would be left behind. And that was his problem. Now, so in a sense, what he said was, the identity he had constructed for himself and the sense of control was, I'm going to do drugs, and parents aren't going to tell me what to do. The group I want to be with are my friends who are like that. I don't want any responsibilities. I don't want any structure. I don't want any consequences, et cetera, et cetera. This was not a resilient kid. And I asked the parents to try and put these pieces into the kid's life. So, what was happening was that there was going to be an outdoor concert coming up that was going to cost, I think, one of these big stadium concerts or something like that. And it was going to cost like $90 to attend. And the kid wanted a ticket. And normally the parents would just hand him the money. So I asked the parents, how did you make your money when you were 15? And they said, oh no, we worked. Any of you have that history? Did you walk uphill both ways to school barefoot in the snow? Yeah, I did too. My kids just don't believe me, but it's true, right? It's totally true, right? You got it. So these parents actually had walked practically barefoot uphill in the snow. Like they really did have a bit of that history. So what they did was, I said to them, well, when you were that age, you learned responsibility. You learned all kinds of good things by having these things happen to you. Do you want to pass some of those lessons on to your child? And they said, you're right, we should do this. So we developed a little thing. We said, okay, let's try it. The concert is coming up, and Dad was also getting a couple of 2 or 3 cords of wood to put into the basement. It was that time of year that the wood was coming in and stuff like that. He needed to stack it. And I said to him, well, who normally stacks the wood in the basement? The guy brings it, they drop it on the driveway, and he stacks it in the basement. Oh, normally I do that. I can't get my kid to do it ever. No way, whatever. I said, well, how many hours would it take to stack 3 cords of wood in your basement? He says, take an afternoon, maybe 4 hours or something. Okay, so fine. Right? So I said to him, well, 4 hours, $90, what does that work out to? That's like what, about $22 an hour, $23 an hour, $22.50 an hour? That's not bad. Any of you at 15 earning $22.50 an hour? That's not a bad wage, right? He said, yeah, I guess that's so. Right? Okay, so we're going to ask the boy to do the stacking of the wood, and then we'll give him the money for the concert. Simple solution, right? No problem. Good plan. Everyone agrees to it. Friday afternoon comes. They go home, right? Friday afternoon, the wood's there. Boy says, hey, it's Friday. I've been working hard all day in school, right? I'm not going to stack the wood. I have all weekend anyways, right? No problem. Parents going, yeah, I guess so, whatever. Well, he's up all night, right? He's up practically all night. So he doesn't even wake up on Saturday until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And they say, hey, the wood. But before they can even get the words out, it's like he's grabbed something out of the fridge and he's off to go see his friends. Well, he'll be back later a little bit. Doesn't show up again. Late, 8 o'clock, whatever, comes back. It's too dark. He can't do this, whatever. Then he's going out and doing some gaming or whatever. Okay, so Sunday morning comes. Well, Sunday morning he says, no, I have some homework to do. What homework? Homework? Yeah, he had some homework or something. So he sat on his computer. They didn't know if he was doing homework or surfing the web or watching YouTube videos or something, but he was on the computer for a couple of hours. Finally, Sunday afternoon comes. It's looking like it's going to rain outside. Now they're like practically yelling at the kid, get the wood in, get the wood in. And at that point he says, you're always yelling at me. They have a fight and he runs out the house. And Dad puts the wood in the basement. So the parents came back to see me the next week. The boy wasn't with them. And they walk in, and I say to them, hey, and the dad says, so I said, who put the wood in? He said, I did. And I said, wow. And I immediately, you know what I did, because I'm a bit impulsive sometimes, I said immediately, oh my God, wow. Well, hey, look, that was an amazing opportunity for your kid to learn by not going to the concert, right? And then I'm sure there's all kinds of good learning out of that. And as it was leaving my mouth, I kind of like went, I wish I could, go backwards in time, because as I was leaving my mouth, I watched these 2 parents do this. And I realized, you don't, as a therapist, you often make big mistakes. That was definitely one of them. And I went, uh-oh. And I said, you didn't, he went to the concert, right? And they said, yeah, we gave him the $90. They couldn't. They just couldn't do it, It was too painful, because they came out of nothing, and they wanted their son to have everything. But what they'd missed was, the boy didn't need money. He needed resilience. He needed the building blocks. He needed an environment that stressed him so he would learn something important. And the sad story of this is, truthfully, the boy never completed high school. He slid deeper into drugs, and the problems mounted, especially when they did not advance him and his friends went on in their grades. So I mean, in some ways, the reason I'm sort of emphasizing that, excuse me just for a second. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because I just want to really make it clear that we have a choice as parents. We can give kids the building blocks for what they need, or, in a sense, we don't. Let me give you a little test here, if I could. Let me help you to think about resilience another way. Thinking about your kids, okay? Here's some questions to ask. Let's see how you do, okay? So think about one of your children, if you have more than one. And ideally, these questions are really more appropriate for 5 years and older, so you have to sort of think about them that way. If you have a younger child, then you're probably going to think more about your resilience rather than your child's, okay? Here's some questions. Let's think about this. Can you fill in the blanks? All right? Here's the questions. There are people in my life who expect me to blank. Is it very clear to your child that there are people who expect them to do things? And by consequences, when I don't meet expectations, I know that blank will happen. The screen is cutting off. I'm just going to read these out on the bottom. For the other relationships, think about this. I can reach out to my blank to get help when I need it. In other words, does the child know that they have relationships that will actually help them if and when they need that help? Let me give you some other ones. For identity, I feel respected for what is special about me when I'm with or at or doing. Maybe power and control experiences with your kid. In my blank, I get to participate in making decisions that affect my blank. Does your child have those experiences? Or maybe for belonging or a sense of belonging. At my blank, people miss me when I'm not there. Does anybody miss your kid when they don't show up? Certainly you would, but does anybody else in their world? What if I kept going with this idea of belonging? Oops, sorry. Sense of culture. There are places such as blank where I can celebrate my culture and my beliefs, rights and responsibilities. When I'm with others at my blank, I feel treated fairly. What about when I'm with blank, I am responsible for myself or others? And maybe on safety and support, I could ask, I am well cared for by someone, something, or I feel safe when I'm with or at. Now reflect for a minute. How many of those resilience-promoting factors did your child have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? What the science on this sort of says to us is that the more of those things that you have in your life, the more likely you are to be able to cope with a crisis, like bullying, like abuse, like violence, maybe your parents' divorce, if you won't tumble into drugs. The more of those things that you say you can feel that you have, you do better in life. Which gives me hope because all of those 9 things you as parents can provide your children. And that's what's magical about this idea. Now, what's interesting is, our kids, though, it gets kind of weird because if we don't provide those things, then the kids kind of figure it out themselves, right? And they will find a sense of belonging. Like Bridget, she went and found a group of peers that were sort of more troubled because they provided her with a more powerful identity than the group that her parents wanted her to hang with. And if an anxious child is very, very anxious at school, then they simply accelerate their neuroses in a sense and stay at home to avoid the problems that they don't want to deal with. So you get this constant dance with our kids so that they will essentially do whatever they need to do to survive and thrive. It's also weird because you have to ask yourself sometimes, your kids can have hidden strengths or what I've called hidden resilience. Let me give you an example. Do you know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk? You know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Kid, growing up, whatever, a bit of a dunce, right? And he trades the cow for the 3 beans, right? And the beans grow into a beanstalk, and he rips off the giant and all that kind of. You got that story, right? Can I retell you the story of Jack and the Beanstalk with a resilience twist on it? Here's the real story of Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Think about it for a second. Jack is being raised in a kingdom, right, where there's not a lot of social services. Think about it. This kid there's no mention of him ever going to school, right? There's no truancy officers, there's no child care workers, there's no early childhood education specialists, and he's a dunce. It actually says that, right? He's a dunce, but he has undiagnosed learning challenges. But does anybody diagnose Jack? No, of course not. They leave him at home with his mother in dire poverty. There's no social assistance network, there's no social welfare, there's nothing, and these people are starving to death. What kind of kingdom is this anyways, right? They have no social safety net whatsoever. Right? Anyways, so this mother and kid are living in dire poverty. He's got undiagnosed learning challenges. And eventually they're so poor that the mom says, you have to take their only thing that we have left to sell is this cow. Take it to market and we'll see if we can survive a little longer. Wow. Jack takes the cow, of course, because he's got learning challenges, probably some sort of undiagnosed ADHD, impulsivity disorder. The first con man who comes along says, I'll give you 3 beans for the cow. And this kid with no impulse control at all, no self-regulation, right? Nobody has taught him not to eat the marshmallow or whatever it is, the latest self-regulation skills, right? Or he just trades the cow for the beans. Oh my gosh, now that's a serious problem, right? Then he goes home, and what does his mother do? She gets really upset and sends him to bed without a meal. That, by the way, the social worker should have intervened there, I think, don't you? Anyways, then so that's the beginning of the story. Now, there's an interesting twist here, because Jack doesn't appear to have many resilience skills at all, right? He sounds kind of vulnerable. He's impulsive, he's disordered, he's bad decision making, he's uneducated, he has learning challenges. This is not a great kid, right? Well, it depends. Next morning, there's a beanstalk growing up into the sky where they threw the beans, right? And what does Jack do? He goes out and climbs the darn thing without any safety gear at all. No harnesses, ropes, shin pads, nothing. What kind of impulsively disordered kid does that? And he goes up in there, and then what does he do? He finds the giant sleeping, and he steals the golden egg. And then he robs the giant of the golden egg, comes back down and gives it to his mother and rescues the family out of poverty. That's amazing. But then the story doesn't stop there. He goes back up and steals the hen that lays the golden egg. And then he goes back for a third time and steals the harp from the giant. Now, by this point, this poor giant, he's got a nice little territory up there in up in the sky, right? And he's tending his gardens, right? And this poor giant, this little creepy kid from the neighborhood keeps crawling in there and stealing his stuff. So what does that good giant do? He just kind of chases the kid away, right? And then he's chasing him down the beanstalk. But Jack, let's face it, Jack has not gone to school. He didn't waste his time studying and sitting in classrooms. No, he was on the farm chopping wood and hauling water and doing all those really, thank God, because this story would have a very different ending if he had gone to school. He would have wasted all his potential, because what does he do? He chops down that beanstalk with an axe so fast that he's able to kill the giant. We read to our children stories about conduct disordered, impulsively unregulated, dysregulated ADHD children who murder and steal. I've ruined that bedtime story for you, haven't I? My point being is, sometimes we have strengths. The problem isn't us. It's that the world we're in doesn't acknowledge them or doesn't see them, right? And there is very much in the studies of resilience this need to match, to make sure that if your kid is not doing well, part of it you have to also ask is the environment in which I'm providing this kid the right one to bring out what they can do? And that becomes this kind of back and forth dynamic of what resilience actually has come to mean, or what it potentially could mean. Why don't I, what I feel like, I tend to sort of like bring lots of other materials. The last part of this I'd like to sort of just bring you around to is a little bit of some of the worries that we as parents have about our kids. I'm saying basically, if you caught the tone of what I'm saying, is we need to give our kids more responsibilities, a little more chance to sort of spread their wings, a little bit more chance to develop powerful identities, a little bit more decision-making power over who they're with and where they are and those kinds of things. And I often get pushback from parents who say, Mike, that sounds good, but if I'm going to give my kid these 9 things, the world out there is a really dangerous place. And I don't think I can give my kids these 9 things. I just want to sort of reassure you here of something. The world is actually safer than it's ever been before. Our jails, I know you're going, that's not possible. Our jails are actually emptying, not filling up, especially with kids. If you look at all the major indicators, our kids are actually, on many, 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 many indicators, doing better than they've ever done. I used to listen to parents and say, well, the world must be very dangerous. And then I began to do the research. And I couldn't find evidence of it. Your child's less likely to be murdered. Your child's far less likely to be kidnapped by a stranger. In fact, when you were growing up, your odds of being kidnapped by a stranger were 3 times as high as they are today. So they're far less. You're growing up, I don't know, name another variable. Violence against children, car accidents, all those statistics are going down. Even things like drug use is about equal, or in some populations going down, not up. We have this mythic notion that, but like all those public health dollars, all those initiatives, they accumulated. We're actually keeping kids safer. And doing all kinds. Now, we do have some other risks that are happening these days, right? Anxiety disorders, right? Excessive cell phone use, right? Texting and driving if they're a little bit older. Those kinds of things are definitely on the rise. But those are also things that I think we can still control, right? But somehow we have this myth that our children are actually at more risk. And that simply is not true. Even, dare I say, sex. Right? Kids aren't more sexually active than we were 50 years ago. Do you know that? Can I convince you of that? You're going, no, kids are more. No. Kids are actually either the same amount or less than we were generations ago. It's true. I mean, I know you can challenge, come on, that can't be, because I know you see on the videos everything, right? But the point of this is that it's true. Kids about the same age, right? In grade 8, about 6% of kids, 7%, 8% of kids become sexually active. Did you know that? Yeah, about that? Yeah. And it goes up about 10%, more or less, right through high school. And what are we, June, right? We're right around the time of proms. By the end of prom night, about 50 to 60% of kids will have already become sexually active. And that number has not changed since any of you were growing up. In Ontario, in Nova Scotia, in the US. Now, I say that because we have this kind of misunderstanding of what it is that actually makes our kids at risk. It's become a normative rite of passage for kids to become sexually active. And I say that because I think sometimes we're misguided on this. The real risk seems to be if we don't teach them about sexually transmitted infections. That is actually the risk, right? Because you were sexually active, our generation was, as well as basically the kids are today. So I don't know how you're going to teach kids about that, but I do know that that's the information that you're going to need. And the good news, by the way, is that pregnancy rates are way down. So even though they're just as active as we were, our rates of pregnancy were much higher than theirs, which is kind of cool. At least we're making some dent. But their rates of sexual transmitted infections were down a few years ago, and they're going back up again because they're getting sloppy. The AIDS scare is gone, and therefore they're getting sloppy again. So I tell you those kinds of things because I want you to sort of put this in perspective, that we need to let go of our kids. We need to let them get out there in the world and begin to not to totally experiment, but to understand that they are going to take some healthy risks. And that we need to facilitate their growth and their potential and provide them worlds where they can show their stuff and realize, all of these opportunities to be the best that they can possibly be. So what I'm inclined to do at this point is, I find sometimes the best way I can do these talks is after seeding those ideas with you, is to pause there and just open this up for questions and chase, sort of, depending on what you ask, I can sort of provide either a little bit more detail or delve deeper or show you something a little bit different on the slides or something like that. Would that work? So just to kind of pause there and say, what did you bring up particular questions? Maybe something you're curious about. If not for your own family, for other families or something like that. Yeah, hi. And we do have a microphone. Is it possible for somebody to run that? Do you mind? Thank you very much. I think they're both working. I think, and as much for the online folks who are listening in? In the middle there. Hi. Yeah, we're going to leave that on, right? Now you're going to be afraid to do that. Now, how's that one? That one sounds like it's on.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Just when you were talking about the responsibilities and how you had your daughter get you a cup of tea, how do you handle the child that looks at you and says no?
I mean, the cup of tea thing is like, it was optional, right? If she didn't want to go in and do that, then that's fine. Usually kids at 7 want to do those kinds of things because they feel older and pumped up and it's responsibility and they get to look important. And I mean, there's lots of stuff in it, right? The kid doesn't want to do it, no problem. It's not like, it's a favor to me. So I guess the question is, am I doing favors? I mean, as parents, we constantly do favors for our kids.
Other responsibilities around the house, like
Sure. Give me like an example.
unloading the dishwasher when it's their turn. They
Right,
have
so
assigned
it's-
days for unloading the dishwasher. And
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, who gets inconvenienced when the dishwasher doesn't get emptied?
Me.
Okay, so that's the consequence, right? Is that you get more inconvenience. So let me ask you, how old is the child?
Well, I got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old
Sure.
and even a 19-year-old that tries to get out of chores.
Okay, so collectively they're not doing this stuff, right?
Right.
And I guess the question is, so what are you doing for them that, if you think about the number of minutes it takes you to empty the dishwasher, let's be liberal on that, say 10, 15 minutes for you to actually do the extra chores, right?
Yeah.
So that's 10 or 15 minutes less that you have for them, right? Technically.
Okay. Yeah.
So what do you make a point of telling them that you cannot do for them because they haven't done this small thing for you?
I guess I probably don't tell them anything right now.
But think about what is it, do you ever drive your 12-year-old anywhere for
No,
a date?
He won't go anywhere.
Oh.
Usually it's the Xbox that they lose.
See, I have a problem with that one because Xboxes have nothing to do with dishes.
No, you're right.
So there's no connection, right? And chances are if it was working, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
Exactly.
So they buy the Xbox themselves, of course?
Actually, my one son just did, but the other one was a Christmas gift.
Oh, I see, right.
But they buy most of their games with their own money.
Yeah, okay, so at least they're all buying the games, right? And who's paying, like, and then of course, that's 15 minutes of your time to empty the dishwasher. Do you work outside the home or are you at home full time?
I work, but I'm on leave right now.
Okay, and we would value 15 minutes of your time at about how much money? I'm not actually asking that aloud, am I? Sorry, let's give you a liberal wage. $10, okay? Let's say it's a $10, right? Just a round number. Okay, so I would look at it in those kinds of, I mean, I know it sounds silly, but I'm trying to get it into the language of the kids, saying, look, like this is like my time, and my time's worth something. So if you guys don't have enough time to empty the dishwasher, then what is it that you can't do for them that is in a way makes it inconvenient for them?
Okay.
Right? And like, does that mean that, you don't have time to, say, do something else that keeps the internet on at night or something like that, right? Because it uses up energy or electricity. Like, I'm always curious about how we can make it their problem. If I take away their Xbox, then it's my problem. One, it has no bearing on the dishes. So what do they eat off of, by the way? Like when you serve them food, what do they eat off of?
Dishes.
Any reason?
Because it's normal.
Well, only if dishes, I don't know, back in our caveman days, I'm sure we didn't have dishes. I mean, there must be what about leaves? Ever thought about leaves? They're disposable, biodegradable. I'm not totally joking about this.
We got lots.
You bring in a great big oak leaf later on this summer and say, look, no one's emptying the dishwasher. I've gone to biodisposable. I get china. You get leaves. End of problem. Right? And you're laughing.
Yes. I like
You'd
no.
get their attention
Yeah. No,
for
you're
about
right.
5 minutes, and you go, look, I'm really fed up, guys. I know this is silly, but come on. We're a partnership here, and I'm working too hard, and you guys aren't working hard enough. And if you want me to drive you, the one I often get with kids is the drives. If it takes 15 minutes to empty the dishwasher, I don't have 15 minutes to drive you to your friends. Right? And if it takes 15 minutes to empty the dishwasher, I, by the way, don't have $10 to spend on the junk food that you like to eat. Every family, do you guys all have a junk food budget? No? I mean, no? Some families have junk, you know what I mean by junk food. It's like that we all have a sort of a little bit of stuff that's not like the core things we have to buy, and we buy a few things, right? And usually our kids like that, and we do that for the kids. And that's another really easy one to get rid of. Say, look, that's $10 that's my time's worth at least $10. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to buy you your junk food, but I really love Haagen-Dazs $7 a bar bars. That is that is killer for me. How many people, do you ever buy those things? I flinch. If I treat my partner, she really loves those. So it's a big treat is to buy a Haagen-Dazs bar. Do you know what I mean? Like, come on, I'm not the only insane person in this room, right? And you buy the Haagen-Dazs bars, right? And you go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm spending $7.99, right? And even when they're on sale, they're $5.99. You go, okay, they're $5.99. They're only mildly sinfully crazy expensive, right? And you buy a box every now and then. Some people do this, right? I'm not the only one, right? Okay, thank you. My point is that I found sometimes with these kinds of things is we don't pay the kids the allowance. But we do things back. Like, I'm not going to waste my money on kids who can't even empty the dishwasher. I am not buying them Doritos, or I'm not buying them the pop that they like. I'm buying my flavored soda water and my Haagen-Dazs bars, and they're being locked away in the freezer with a lock on them. You ain't touching them, kids. Well, yeah, I mean, you also have to get to the trust level, right? So you touch that, and then we're into a whole other level of trust problems here, right?
I have a lock on a fridge and 2 cupboards.
Well, there you go. Then if you get that, I'd suggest also you got to get some coaching and then on walking through all those steps.
I've got a compulsive eater at home.
But you're on the right track in a sense of saying, how do I make this uncomfortable for the child instead of uncomfortable for me?
Okay.
And I find sometimes the Xbox doesn't make it uncomfortable for me.
No, it's obviously.
Or sorry, uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for them, but it doesn't relate directly to.
It just pisses them off, really.
You want the dishwasher emptied, and you want them to contribute to the welfare of all the family, and that's where I kind of go with that.
Okay.
I don't cook special food for someone who doesn't respect me enough to empty the dishwasher, right?
Yeah. Okay.
It's those kinds of things, and I'm not being mean. I'm just being realistic. Can I try something else? Some other question. You're going to see a pattern to the way I respond to these. I'm basically using these, I'm not taking away safety or security or food from these kids. I'm just basically saying I'm trying to reinforce power and control and decision making and consequences and structures. Was there somebody else? From them? And they just take their plates?
No, they didn't want it. They didn't want to clean the table. So I left the dirty plates, and they didn't want to do the dishwasher, so I left it there for 3 days.
Yeah, good on you.
I didn't make them supper, so they grabbed something.
Yeah.
And then the oldest one said, then I don't eat. And then you get the attitude, and the rest just swallow up. Then we got a discussion. You wanted kids. This is slavery. Because I wanted kids, I wanted normal kids. I made a brain in that little head, and you have to use it.
Yeah.
And you can respond like that. You can do all the right things, but you just get to.
So you stopped cooking, and they stopped eating?
Oh yeah, they snack at school. The 12-year-old cried at school and she didn't got any lunch, so I brought it.
You got social workers after you, probably. Look, I think you're on actually the right track. It's just what I'm understanding. So if we're focused on trying to build resilience and decision-making and capacity and kindness and really making kids into competent, caring contributors to their communities, you're just saying, I'm introducing some natural consequences. We need you to do some basics here, folks. If they're that hardcore and they're going to gang up on you and they're going to team up, then I guess the question is you need to have a family little group and say, okay, so how are we going to, are we really this fragmented? Like, are we, am I just going to give you the money and you go to the grocery store and figure this out yourself so you can get some food? I mean, that would be the kinds of things I would be more inclined to do, is not necessarily totally deny them food. But I might say, well, look, are we going to do this like I shop for my food and you shop for your food? And, is that what we're going to do? I give you $20 and you go off to the grocery store on your own? Is that...
Chips at 5 o'clock, they weren't hungry anymore. When I started my friend, I'm not gonna eat supper. The old giggle, I said, you don't even have chips.
You only have chips. So you're in a lovely power battle with them. There's no, I mean, I think I would encourage you, though, just to hold steady, think about the consequences. You're doing, in a sense, you're probably not that far off. I mean, for some reason, they just don't want to participate in this family. I'm not quite sure why that is. You might want to think about, I would sort of delve a little bit deeper into what is it they're actually looking for? What are they actually... Sorry? Well, they're looking for, but they are looking for control, right? So what is it in this relationship that is so, they lack so much control over that they need to do this kind of stuff? It's interesting to, that they just, this is where they've decided that they want control. Oh, one eventually started cooking and started cleaning the dishes and everything else?
Well, they figured out that the 18-year-old could go to McDonald's because she makes money.
Yes.
So they did that for a few days.
Cool.
They don't do that anymore.
And eventually they said it's easier if mom cooks some food. Yeah.
There's the fourth one, I don't know,
How old?
17.
Oh, so they're not going to starve.
No, she finds ways for food.
Yeah.
And I have to give her a ride because she has a job and she has to go there. And I said, I'm not going to drive from A to B.
Hang on a minute. Sorry, you're her taxi?
Well, otherwise she can't go there. And he says, well, then you said I needed a job. If you don't drive me, I can't make money. There we go again.
Right. But I always find it, let me just follow this and then I'm going to go to the second question here. Just to follow that through a little bit. What do you charge her to drive you? What do you charge her to drive her to her job?
I tried that a few times for her to take gas.
Didn't work?
Yeah, and the money she made went into gas to my car, so she kind of telling me to give up her job because she
Oh.
didn't pay for my gas to get there.
But that's
The thing that I tried to explain.
That's pretty normal. And if she wants to sacrifice her job because she doesn't want to pay the gas, I don't have a problem with that. If I might, though, you know what I would do with the money instead of gassing the car up? I would say, how much do you pay? If you pay a taxi driver, you don't know what he does with the money or she does with the money, right? I would make this a little more ambiguous. I would say, thank you very much for the money. You're paying for my time, not my gas. Right? You're paying for, you can either do chores around the house and contribute as an adult, or you can pay me as your taxi driver. I'm going to give you a very good deal, half of what it would cost to be a regular taxi, right? You figure out what is an actual taxi ride, and you charge half of that, which is a pretty good deal. And then what you do, I always say to parents, is don't hide that money. Don't put it into gas or food. What you do is you take it, and you go out for like a manicure or a pedicure or something, and you make sure you come back and say, thank you. You know what I mean? And you make it's a little bit of a joke about it, but actually the kid is actually paid for this. And until but it's either this or some dishes. Your choice. I knew a kid that took 3 months. He'd rather pay his parents to drive him to work, and the parents would go to lavish dinners on his money, than for him to give in and just simply load the dishwasher. That's all they wanted him to do. But it's his choice. Let's try another question. Hi, sir.
Hi there, how are you? I have a 12-year-old son, ADHD, struggled most of his years in public school.
Wow.
And through a lot of interactions, and I do mean a lot of interactions with members of the school board, I've been told a few times that I guess I talk to my child too much like an adult and trying to give the lessons from an adult perspective. As I'm looking at these needs of a child, and we're rounding this, moving into the teenage years, I'm wondering, as I try to attempt to impose some of these things with his teachings, is it wise to talk about this openly? This is what we are doing.
Sure, I have no problem with that. I mean, when I work with kids directly, I'm often exactly saying, this is where we're going with this. This is the things I think, this is the things that might be helpful. Absolutely, absolutely. I don't, there's a difference between talking to your kid respectfully as an adult and showing them how adults talk to each other and giving them too much control, or, kids don't want to make every decision for themselves. Like, just be really clear, right? Kids appreciate structure and rules in the same ways we adults do. Nobody likes to live in there's a few people who say they do, but even they like, thank God it's Fridays, sort of, 2 for 1 at the bar sort of thing. It's nice to have some sort of structures in our lives and expectations on us. So while we can respectfully talk to our kids and explain what we're doing and what's good for them or what we think is good or what our lives are like, that doesn't mean that we have to abdicate our responsibilities to actually set some structures and rules. One doesn't necessarily foreclose on the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess if I could, just one more. So what is the best piece of advice you could give some of these, you could give me, to letting go of some of those feelings that, if my kid rides his bike to school, he's going to get hit by a car, so I'll drive him.
Can I put you through a little? I have some fun. Just saying. I have to scooch a little bit down. I bring lots of different slides. So, how about this? I ask parents 4 questions. That's exactly why I want to ask you that. I never tell a parent, you got to change your behavior, or you should be lighten up, or I don't know what the right amount of risk a child's supposed to have, because it's all very contextual and very cultural. But I always ask these questions. First question: what risks did you take growing up? In fact, why don't we start some gossip in Sarnia here for a second? Do you mind just turning to someone next to you, especially somebody you don't know, just for literally less than 30 seconds? Just tell them something risky that you did growing up. You don't mind sharing, by the way. Just try it. I'll give you the rest of the questions. Just literally for 20 or 30 seconds. Go. Just something risky that you did growing up that was on the edge. Okay, I'm going to bring you back from that. You guys can have that conversation when the child's not around, okay? Too late. Oh no, too late. You did something risky, I take it, right? You had some of those kinds of. So here's the question. I don't know, you're saying you have a 12-year-old, whatever, okay. So I say, when you were 12, what kinds of things were you doing? What kinds of risks were you taking? Around that age, right? And then the second question I ask, by the way, that's my daughter coming out of the forest, the wild animal that she can be. The second question I always ask is, well, taking those risks, what did you learn? Right? You learned something, right? I'll never date a guy like that again. I often hear from women, right? I'll never date a woman like that again. That sort of thing. So the third question I always ask is, were those lessons helpful or unhelpful to you later in life? Right? Isn't that the question? Right? So you learned something back then, and those lessons were either helpful or unhelpful. So far, so good. Now, look, if you tell me you don't want your kid to ride his bike to school, I get it. Right? Maybe you live right next to an expressway with 4,000 cars a day passing your front lawn. I don't know. Or who knows where you live, right? Maybe there have been drive-by shootings and you're worried about that. I don't know what your real situation is. So you're saying you don't want your kid to bike to school. I respect that. I get that. The fourth question, though, is the key one. How is your child going to learn the same things that you learned by taking risks? So the focus is less on protecting the child from risks. And the next question is, how are you going to give your child the same opportunities to learn the things that you learned when you did take risks? So if you have, I mean, can I ask you a question here? Let's just try something here for a second. How old were you when you moved out on your own for the very first time? Like you were totally emancipated, like really left home for the first, like I'll just start, 29 or older, or maybe you're still living at home. That's okay, just raise your hand. No. 28. Anybody 28 when you left home? 27. 26? Come on, you've got to raise your hand. Somebody must be. No? 25. 24. Nobody? 24. 23. Anybody 23 when they left home? 22-year-olds when you left home for the first time. Oh, yeah. 21. Okay. 20. Anybody 20? 19. Lots of 19-year-olds. What about 18? Oh, lots and lots of 18-year-olds. Anybody 17 or younger? Whoa, look at all those 17 or youngers who left home. Now, imagine you have a 15-year-old at home right now. You could have as little as 24 months to get them completely ready to leave. Are you getting them to cook and clean and do their laundry and all the other responsibilities that they have to learn? So the focus shifts from protecting them from life to allowing them to have the manageable amounts of responsibilities and to have the structure and the consequences and the opportunities to actually have the skills they need to be resilient later in life. I could do the same one, by the way, if I really wanted to have some fun. I could say to you, and like, you know, at what age were you like sexually active? We can just raise our hands. Who, 29 and older? No, don't do that, no. No, we don't want to do that. Too much information for our community to share. My point being is we want to get kids ready. And the focus has to shift from, don't want my son to drive his bicycle to school. I get that. So when is he going to learn to navigate the road? Do you really want to put a kid who's never ridden a bicycle on the streets into a car at 16? Is that the first time you're going to allow them to operate anything on the highways? That just seems insane, insanely dangerous. Let me try another question here, just to sort of switch this up a little bit. You, ma'am, in the purple? Hi. Can we get a microphone to you? Just to, do one or two more questions, then I'll. Hi.
So my question is getting our children ready for adulthood. I have
Sure.
a 14, almost 15-year-old, some learning challenges, and he doesn't want to learn to do anything. Like his younger brother can, cook basic meals and whatever.
Yeah.
He's afraid of the stove, so he doesn't want to cook it. If he can do it microwave, he's fine.
Yeah.
He could. If he
He wouldn't starve.
No, Pizza Pockets and Hungry Man's were good. Doing laundry, nothing. Like it's almost like he's afraid. And
Yeah.
I don't know how. Short of tying him to my hip, which he's like almost 6 feet tall, it won't work.
But you also say he has some challenges.
Yeah.
So he's not quite ready to launch yet on that stuff.
No.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to even try and get him. Like, this is a kid who has just become comfortable tying his skates for hockey.
Yeah.
And cutting soft foods with a fork and knife and stuff. So am I expecting too much?
Probably, yeah.
Because chronologically he's old enough to be doing this, or
Yeah.
and how do I get him to, because I find myself getting really frustrated, and then I have to take a step back and go, okay, well, maybe he's not ready, or am
Yeah.
I babying him because I think he's not ready?
Well, two things. Two things. One is every child does this at a different pace, and he sounds like he has some challenges, and he's going to do it at a much different pace.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing that happens, I see sometimes, is families where the child is out of sync with the rest of the family.
Mm-hmm.
So if this kid was on a farm or in a completely different environment, he might cope fine because there'd be no stress. You know what I mean? Like different families have different expectations, so you get that kind of weird out of sync.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, can you give him things that he does value to do? Like, are there tasks around the house that he might be competent at? Fixing, sometimes kids like this know how to fix the computer in the house, or they have an interest in something else.
Right.
If you have a pet, will they walk the dog or clean the cat box or something? It's funny how people will think it has to be the cooking, but maybe it's other things that he can take on.
Found it yet, because he's one of those kids too that it doesn't seem, no matter what I do, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
So.
But that's kind of easygoing. Is he
Yeah.
disruptive in school?
No.
He's just going at his own pace
We
through
poke
life.
him to make sure he's still breathing.
Yeah. And you know what? I wished we lived in a world that allowed us more leeway. There was a book published a few years ago called Shy. And it argued basically that we, as a society, we don't like shy people. You know, we don't have a lot of space anymore for slothy, slower, gentler, quieter, introspective people. We all have to be sort of the, you know, out there, entrepreneurial, moving fast and doing stuff. And there are people like that. He doesn't sound that bad. He just kind of is his own person, and he'll move through life at his own pace when he's ready.
No, I love him, because compared to his older brothers, he's a walk in the park. But
Yeah, and there's advantages and disadvantages. Be careful what you wish for, right?
the other thing, though, is his younger brother is starting to surpass him, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing a conflict there. Now, it could be age.
No, but
Because
that will
they're-
probably happen. At some point, he's going to be a little bit upset with
And
that. Yeah.
And I
But-
don't know if that's where
But isn't that for them to sort out?
I guess if they.
Yeah, it
feel
is.
they-
I mean, just let them.
And
I mean, that's for him to sort out. Or when he gets more motivated to look for more, help him find more.
Do you have a dictionary for caveman speak?
Caveman speak, yeah, grunt. You get the grunts? Yeah. You know what? No, there is a solution for caveman speak for grunting. Do you ever, instead of talking at kids, do you ever switch that around and model for them how you actually, like for instance, when you come home from work or wherever you come home from your day or whatever you're doing, do you actually, instead of asking kids questions, do you just tell them about your day? Do you ever even do that? So instead of getting the grunts, especially adolescents, you know, do that grunting thing. How's your day? Do you have homework? Did you pack for hockey? What do you have? Did you fill that form out? Is your bag clean? All right, what are you doing? Did you do the dishes? Did you walk the dog? Like we do that to kids, right? And then they end up just going, right? Versus, have you ever thought about reversing it and saying, boy, did I have a day. I have this boss. Oh my God, I can't believe he did it again. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened at work today. And often you think the kid's going to like, what the? But actually, if you start doing that, you model for them how you have an adult-like conversation, coming back to your point. And you actually start the conversation. Like, I don't share all the money problems and everything else, but to actually have a genuine conversation, say, I just had a really rough day at work. Can I talk to you about it for a minute? Do you have any advice? And often, I love it when kids will do this. I saw my teacher have a problem like that, or we had a problem in my school, and suddenly the kid has a real story to tell, instead of, did you clean the dog kennel? Like, you know, did you clean up after, you know, like, kids don't want questions like that. They want a real joining with you. I do find that is one way around it a little bit. Let me just in the interest of time, let me just take one last comment or question if there is. Hey, is something else that's burning that you brought? Going, we're good? Or is there was there a hand? And then I'll just drop it. Hey.
How much responsibility do we as parents have to accept for any derailing of our children, especially in their teenage years?
Well, derailing, you mean that you think kids are being derailed? Kids are having problems more? Is that
you
what
know, I have to be cautious because let's say we have a parent and their son's involved with drugs and their life's starting to take a dark turn.
Sure.
You know.
Oh, how much would you think that's the parents versus? It's complicated. It's not, I think, you know, there's lots of, just like resilience are those 9 factors, what makes our children vulnerable is also very complicated. You can have early psychosis, you can have mental health issues that are internal, you also have environments, you have school systems that don't hold kids accountable, we have societies triggering them, we have cell phones, we have a lot of you know, stuff that's polluting our kids' minds, whatever. It's a collective problem. What I will say is that just like, you know, I don't think you as parents have the responsibility to fix all these problems with your kids, nor to create the resilience. If you notice, most of those 9 things, you couldn't possibly, as one family, do all that. That's why you have extended family. That's why you have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and grandparents or extended family if they're around, and you have neighbors and coaches and piano teachers. And it really is an effort to fix kids. But it also means that those same people can also destroy kids or cause a lot of problems for them, right? So I think it's a combination of things. And I only hope that maybe tonight, I guess my point tonight was to switch the conversation towards some of the positives and perhaps to stimulate some ideas on the things that you can actually do. If your child is in crisis, look for those 9 things. Try and answer those questions I gave you. Give them those foundation stones, and you might find that they actually do better. So if your child, coming back to this woman's comment, if your child doesn't want more control, then they're fine. They're not unhappy. If they have a powerful identity or they like who they are and it's a kind of a slothy nothing, then that's okay too. You know, but it's just, yeah. And I think sometimes, but you're right, if we give kids bad identities or they